Ladies and gents, welcome back to another Enginears podcast. Thanks for joining us. We've got Simon Perryman joining us today, who's going to talk about a really interesting subject, hiring software engineers in San Francisco. And we'll be uncovering what that looks like in his experience. He's ex EA, he's ex Amazon, he's ex Twitch. And I think in this episode, we're going to learn a lot about what to do, what not to do, and maybe uncovering more truths about what it is really like. Simon, thanks for joining us, mate.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I've been a follower of the show for a while now, so it's good to be here finally.
Pleasure. Pleasure. Do you want to give an intro into you and some of your background?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in London. I started a company straight out of university in my 20s. I ran that for about 7 or 8 years. Um, Very, very small thing. Nothing exciting really. Doing sort of web development and IT support stuff for law firms. Um, I moved to EA in 2010
Yep.
to head up a global incident and launch practice. So we were launching live service games, um, tens of millions of daily players, sort of social games, mobile games, that kind of thing. EA had no experience doing that at all. So I sort of came in and built a technical program management function, owned some SRE teams, sort of geared around launching and incident response for when launches didn't go well. That was obviously a very fortunate time in the industry because um, gaming overall was sort of forever changed from this world where you write code, you send that code to a duplication factory, they burn it to a disk and send it to be sold in Tesco's or Asda or whatever, into this world where there are servers behind every game. They're always online. You have to keep updating them. So having that skill set a little bit early meant that uh, I got pulled into a lot of very weird projects for very senior people at EA where I would be people would phone me and explain that they had already booked my flights and that it would be awfully nice if I could be in Canada tonight. I like lived with a go bag next to my desk for about a year, just being sent off to all these random spots where live service games were launching and having to ask very awkward questions like, "You do have an on-call rota, right?" People like, "What? We're going on holiday. We're finished now." Like, no, like launch is when it starts. Everything before that, that's the easy bit. So that was fun, pretty stressful, but that's kind of what got me the attention of some people out in the Bay Area who had some fairly persistent problems with a big mobile game, Simpsons Tapped Out, which was pretty huge. I mean, it was top of the App Store for a while, sort of back in 2012, 13, I think. So that's what ended up getting me a visa to move out to San Francisco. Did that for a few years, found my way via a mobile games company into Twitch, where, um, again, lots of opportunity,
Yeah.
lots of challenge. It was a company of about 150, I think, when I joined, about a year and a half post acquisition by Amazon.
Okay.
But really sort of at that inflection point of scale where they had the resources, but really none of the processes, none of the mechanisms, none of the procedures to get stuff done. So I ended up hiring, I don't know, I lost count, probably 200 and something people in my time there.
Yeah.
Um, that led to, building teams and teams and teams, lots of manager hiring, lots of team building, business case, pitching, justification, that kind of stuff. Came up with, alongside a couple of colleagues, we came up with the idea of taking the Twitch tech stack, making it more widely available to AWS customers.
Yeah.
Which is how we started building Amazon IVS, which is a very, very good low latency live video system that AWS offers to customers. So we built and launched that through the pandemic, which was oh boy, that was a very interesting experience. Very proud to say that I launched an AWS service. The challenge of getting that done through the pandemic was significant.
Especially in gaming. as well, when gaming was nuts during the pandemic,
Yeah.
Twitch, I swear, just blew up out of nowhere as well. I
Hmm.
remember one of my mates just saying to me, like, "Have you seen this before? Smart TV stuck on
Yeah.
Twitch," and
Yep.
I was like, "What are all these streamers doing on here?" I was like,
Hmm.
"This is nuts."
I probably shouldn't share precise numbers, but on the like 3 days after Italy locked down, Italy was the first country that went into lockdown that we had really significant viewership in. So we, other places had already done it, but we had sort of fairly limited data. We didn't have a ton of viewers or a ton of broadcasters there. Italy was the first country, and um, we had to change the scale on our viewership graphs 3 days after they went into lockdown, which was to anyone who, to the engineers in the room, anyone who's done sort of infrastructure planning, that's very scary. Uh, there's a lot of things there that are not just purely elastic, like you can't just consume more resources infinitely, right? So, yeah, keeping up with the existing demand whilst building a new service was a really interesting set of challenges.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, it was very cool. I mean, it was a great experience, and I'm really happy to have had it. But it was a challenge, which sort of led me through to December last year, which is when I left Amazon, and I am now a coach, an investor, and a strategic advisor.
Enjoying it?
Very much so. I get I get the bits of the job that I really enjoyed. I get to have um, 15 hours a week of conversations with really smart, really motivated, driven people.
Mhm.
Um, I get to be, yeah, I get to be a coach. I get to be sort of instrumental and a force multiplier in the work that they are doing.
Yep.
Um, I don't have to talk to HR. I don't have to go to budget meetings. I don't have to worry about headcount. Like a lot of the sort of the stuff that you do as an engineering leader so that you get to work on the cool problems and do the neat stuff. Yeah, that's kind of gone for me right now. It's pretty it's pretty fantastic. I can just force multiply and come back in a week and go, how did it go? Like,
Yeah,
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 it went
yeah.
great. Or like, oh no, that was terrible.
I was going to say you
Right.
don't need a go bag.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to be there at launch. You can
Yep.
coach at launch, but you don't need to be
Mm-hmm.
there. Love it.
Yep. Yeah. It's a great place to be right now. I mean, in all honesty, I suspect I will get bored. I'm not particularly good at taking it easy, but for the last 12 months or so, it's
Good.
been perfect. Yeah, just what I needed.
All those years back, and you even may see this now, or when you were hiring 200 odd people at Twitch. What's the visa process like? Being sponsored into an organization in the US, there's lots around it.
Hmm. Yeah. So I should caveat here. Um, everything we're going to talk about is from a fairly limited perspective. Like I came here on a particular path. Um, the companies I've worked at here are fairly large, which gives them access to certain visa systems and things that aren't applicable more generally. I also came from the UK, which again changes things, right? Like depending on your country of origin, if you come from Canada, for instance, right? Like there's a fairly different visa system that it arguably a lot easier to use than someone coming from Europe. So I can absolutely talk about my experiences. Not a lawyer, don't know that much about immigration law, would absolutely encourage folks to, you know, do their own
Yeah.
research. I came on an L1A visa. So L1 is intercompany transfer,
Mhm.
which means you have been working for a company that has offices in the US, outside the US, for at least 1 year.
Cool.
Two kinds. L1A is like a management track. L1B is a specialized individual contributor.
Yeah.
Um, depending on the company that you work for. So big companies tend to have like, I think it's called a blanket approval,
Mhm.
which means that the US State Department has said, okay, we trust you. You're not going to abuse this process. If you tell us, hey, this person's a specialist, they're the only person who can do this, cool, cool, we believe you. Um, let's make it happen. Smaller companies don't have that, so you have to sort of go through a few more hoops. You have to sort of, I think there's a burden of proof. You have to prove that someone in the US can't already do the job. That kind of thing. Um, but the L1 is very, very easy. Between like I got a job offer. I think I got a job offer at the beginning of March, like finally finalized on paperwork, started speaking to the attorneys. Um, I got a package back from the attorneys by sort of the second week of March. My embassy appointment was a week later. I had a visa back in my hand by like the 20th of March, I think, and I flew on the 23rd.
That's
Um,
nuts.
all the stuff building up to that, the company side stuff, getting the offer, all of that was obviously complicated, and but that was on EA, not on the process. I also know someone who's on an L1B who had a lot more hassle. But generally, I think if it's smooth sailing, no criminal records or anything in the home country, tricky. I know for Europeans because often for things like background checking agencies will want to see police reports from every country you've lived in.
Yeah.
Which, if you've lived in 3 or 4 different European countries, like, ugh, that can be a real pain. But yeah, L1A, L1B, pretty simple, pretty quick. The only piece of advice I would offer is if you get this sort of offer extended to you, have a look at what the green card terms are with your employer.
Okay.
Make sure that there is a process to convert you from an L1A to a green card. Find out when that process can begin.
Got you.
Lots of companies will say, oh, well, yes, we'll sponsor your green card in 12 months or 24 months or whatever. That's a fairly stressful place to be. I
Okay.
say this from a tremendous, tremendous position of privilege. Lots of folks live there in, large parts of their life in this kind of situation. And I can't imagine how tough that must be. But on an L1, if you lose your job, you go home. You can't apply for a different job. There is no, that's it. You're done. You're going home. So if you've been here 20 months, you've made friends, you've built a life, you've probably signed a lease, you might have bought a car, this is your life. Like, it's where you live. And then there's a layoff at work and suddenly, you get
Yeah.
sent home. It's pretty stressful. So anything you can do to get that green card sooner is really, really powerful.
Top.
H1B is a very, very common option. Each year there's like a pool of a couple of 100,000 visas people can apply to get into that pool. It's often very oversubscribed. But yeah, I think that's probably H1B probably makes up the bulk of folks working here from outside the US.
Yeah.
Uh, don't know a ton about it. Have had a ton of employees who've used it and sort of gone through the process.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if you've got the skill sets, it's not impossible, but you have to be fairly determined. And I think one of the things that people don't think about is once you've decided you want to make the move, you apply for your visa, you kind of put your life on hold a little bit. Like, even when I was doing it with my L1, I decided I wanted to move in like early 2012. A couple of different potential things internally at EA came up, but they fell through. But also, like, I'm not making long-term decisions in the UK because I'm thinking about leaving. And that can become quite stressful, particularly if you're applying for sort of a H1B with a pool and you don't get it this year. Like,
Yeah.
are you willing to sort of punt some of those decisions another year and see if you get it the following year?
Yeah.
Not a big deal, just something sort of small to think about.
No, it is good to think about. In your experience, let's use SF as an example because it'd be really difficult to look at the whole of the US. What's your experience in San Francisco with companies sponsoring, let's say, H1B visas? Is it a regular and done thing? Are you finding?
Um, if you already have a H1, yes, not a
Okay.
problem at all. People will absolutely hire you and put you on their books and everything will be fine. Yep, not a problem at all. Um, I think in a situation where you are overseas and, they want to bring you to the US. I think that's much rarer, um, just because of the complexities around getting a H1.
Okay.
In my experience, usually what happens is, say that, we'll make it easy. Say that you start talking to the company in December. They're like, yep, we really want your skills. We'll hire you in January. You start. We'll apply for the H1 in like March, April, I think is kind of when the window opens and closes, sometime around spring. We'll apply for that. If we get that, great, that's awesome. If not, following January, once you've been with the company a year, we'll pop you on an L1 and you can come in using the L1.
Got you.
That's much more common in my experience.
Got you. Can we talk about some of those 200 hires at Twitch
Mm-hmm.
and how you set up your engineering interviews and why? After, I want to uncover what SF is doing in
Mm-hmm.
terms of engineering hiring and what's the hiring culture. But first, let's talk about your process and your ideas around hiring at Twitch.
Yeah, for sure. I think that I was pretty lucky at Twitch. We had a really strong recruiting team, and we got to borrow from. Going to sound a little bit biased here. We got to borrow from what I think of as one of the best hiring processes on earth.
Yeah.
Amazon. I mean, I joined Amazon at about 70-ish thousand employees, and when I left, it was I had been out in 6 years. I was longer tenured than 93% of Amazon. Like it was nearly 2 million, I think, when I left. It grew tremendously, and the share price increased. The product quality kept up. So stealing from Amazon hiring processes, I think, was really powerful. We did adapt it a little bit to sort of suit Twitch more culturally. I think that the thing to really sort of pinpoint here is that the bigger companies are they're playing a very different game, I think, to the way I've seen hiring done in the UK. Um, the Bay Area is full of like the best talent on earth, right? It's super competitive. People are coming here from all over the world to get these jobs in tech. The salaries are phenomenal. Everything is great. So there's a lot more emphasis placed on both results and execution, but also on culture. One of the things I saw when you know some of the hires I made didn't work out. Obviously, right? No one has this perfect record. Generally, though, those hires didn't fail for technical reasons. They failed for cultural reasons, team reasons, people reasons. And that trend is absolutely mirrored within Amazon. Again, I'm not going to share the exact numbers here, but the vast majority of Amazon technical people that lose their jobs don't lose their jobs for technical reasons.
Okay.
They leave because of personality clashes, inability to work with other people, cannot earn trust, like just cannot get stuff done. And I think one of the things that was really shocking to me was how Google, Facebook, Amazon, EA a little bit. I mean, anywhere you've got more than a couple of thousand people, there is a very defined cultural way of getting stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
The interview process has to select people who can get stuff done in that culture.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You can be right, you can be smart, you can be the best coder on earth. Unless I have a completely solo problem, like if I can pack you off to a ranch somewhere in northern Oregon and you can sit there and work on an algorithm with no help from anybody else, and you just tell me when it's done and then someone else implements it, yeah, great. Maybe I do want the smartest coder on earth. And there definitely are roles for that kind of thing. But generally, what I'm looking for is people who are smart enough to solve the problems and able to do that with others in a team environment in a group.
Mm-hmm.
So my interview process was essentially it varies by level. I'm going to talk broadly, and if you want specifics, we can dive in. But it's about 6 hours, 7 total, right? You're going to do a quick call with a recruiter after we've looked at your resume and said, yep, this person's interesting. recruiter's going to cover the legal stuff, discrimination stuff, visas, eligibility for work, basic stuff like that. You're going to do 30 minutes on the phone with the hiring manager. Provided that all goes well, we call them on-sites, but obviously COVID really put paid to in-person interviews. But we would put together a panel of sort of 4 to 6 people that you meet for about an hour each. 2 of them are going to be fairly technical. So you might get like a whiteboarding, like, hey, how would you approach designing this kind of problem? Usually to figure out how people think about constraints, how they elaborate use cases, how well they focus on users versus how well they focus on the tech, that sort of thing. Another one of them might be like a much more sort of structured sort of coding type thing. The other 4 people are going to be there doing what we call behavioral interviewing. I'm sure you know what that is, given what you do, but like to explain it to people who in the UK, I had never encountered it. Behavioral interviewing is asking questions that basically start with, can you tell me about a time? Can you give me an example of, based on the idea that prior performance is the best indicator of future potential. So can you give me an example of a time you disagreed passionately with a coworker? Right? Really good way to get signal on how people handle conflict or how they have handled conflict, right? Gets you out of hypotheticals. Like, hey, imagine you disagree with someone. What would you do? Everyone can give you brilliant hypotheticals. Oh, I'd handle that with skill and diplomacy. Sure, but like, tell me about a time you did it. Let me dig in a little bit. Let me get to the real nitty gritty there. So 4 of the 6 are going to be about examples of stuff that you have done. Usually companies will tie them to the leadership values. So one of Amazon's values is be right a lot. So I might ask a question like, can you give me an example of a time that you were absolutely sure of the best path, but product management and engineering management disagreed with you? How well did you stick to your guns? How committed were you? How did you convince people? How did you influence? Like that kind of thing. Twitch had a value which was creators first, referencing that without creators, Twitch is nothing. So, can you give an example of a time that you have fought for something you believed one of your customers or users needed? Right? Those kinds of questions are really powerful. And that's going to be the bulk of my hiring process. Because the technical stuff, provided you're pretty close, like you can learn. We can teach you our coding styles, right? Like we can teach you the standards and we can get you mentorship because we've got the resources. Like the thing that's really important is like, can you take feedback? Can you give feedback? Are you going to get on with folks? Are you going to work in this culture? So that's how I structured things for interviewing and hiring at Twitch.
Love it. That's really in depth. How many people, so these 200 people, how long a time did it take you to hire these people in?
It varies wildly. So in my first 9 weeks, I hired 23 people, which was considered, oh my, like no one's really done that before at Twitch. Like that was pretty groundbreaking. I think 2017, I did 45 people in about 9 months. That was new locations. Like that was opening an office in Utah and an office in London. But yeah, I mean, other ones are just sort of backfills, and it varies, right? It depends how much of a focus it was for me.
What do you think your biggest challenge was? And I mean that probably more from like a competitive standpoint as well, as in competing with other organizations.
Yeah, we lost all of our recruiting team on 2 separate occasions, so that was fun. I had to spend 2 days a week hiring recruiters at one point and literally rebuilding. We kept one person recruiting. He was the only person who stayed. Me and that person teamed up to rebuild recruiting from the ground up. So that was a challenge. Didn't know a lot about hiring recruiters. Would argue I still don't, but it sort of worked, I guess. In terms of like competitiveness, there was a period where Uber was tricky for us to compete with, just because they were able to give out really large amounts of non-public stock, whereas Amazon's comp bans are very rigid. Facebook also, there was a period there. I remember getting into a bidding war with Facebook, which was I think we offered 300. Engineer came back and said, "Well, Facebook offered me like 350," and we're like, "Okay, 400. That's it. That's the best we can do." And then he came back and said, "Facebook offered me 550, but I have to sign within 24 hours." We're like, "What?" Like, not 425. Like, Facebook upped us by 150 and put a 24-hour expiry on it. I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
happy for you, man. Like, well done. Well done. Like, that's,
He's just doubled his salary. Well,
yes.
about to offer him 300K, and he's
Yes.
walked away with 550, he or she.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
nuts.
Not that uncommon, honestly.
Really?
I mean, I think the thing that was a real big shock for me coming from the UK is the prevalence of equity compensation and the gamble that you take with equity compensation. Like, I have a couple of friends, one of whom joined Amazon a couple of years ago, and we'll assume their salary was, just for a given value, their salary was 100.
Yeah.
I have another friend around about the same time, very similar levels of seniority, was very smug because they joined Facebook and their salary was 200. If you fast forward to today, person who joined Amazon is making 35% more than person who joined Facebook, who was originally making twice as much as them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not uncommon at senior levels. I mean, senior IC levels, mid to senior IC levels at the big, Facebook, Google, Amazon, you will probably see 60% of your comp, maybe 70, as equity.
Yeah.
So if that equity triples in value,
Yeah.
wow, you've had an awesome year. If it falls by a ton, you've had a not so great year.
Do you see this often as well in SF outside some of the big names like Facebook, Amazon, Uber? I'm using the examples that we've just discussed, but do you see it with other companies, non-public stock? They
Yeah.
just throw it at people.
Yeah. I mean, the challenge that you have with non-public stock is obviously like it could be $1 trillion.
Yeah.
It could also be zero. I think in general there is a fairly limited understanding of how to value non-public offers. Because obviously when you, no offense, when you speak to recruiters,
Yeah.
they're trying to sell you on the role. They're going to, play up that, we're valued at $1 billion now. The next round of fundraising is being done at 8 billion. So that's an 8x value increase in your private stock. Like, wow, like that's you're giving me $1 million of private stock over 4 years, and you're telling me at the next valuation it's going to be, that's 2 million a year on top of the 200 base. Like, wow, like this is, I'm a mid-level engineer. Like, in theory, I'm making 2.2 million a year now. Like, wow. Yeah, great. If you can stick around for 5 years, if the company goes public, if that curve continues, you're going to do fantastically. But there's a lot of ifs in that sentence that, make it fairly high risk, especially nowadays. And I mean, I'm old, I'm grumpy, I'm cynical, like, sure. But I think like there's fun in startups, like chasing that culture, chasing that dream, chasing that product you really care about, working with the amazing team. It's great. It's really awesome. The early days of Twitch, when I was there, were truly, truly magical. I can only imagine what they were 2 years before, as a private company without without Amazon having bought it out. I think it would have been, some of my best friends now are people who were at Twitch pre-acquisition. Like, culturally we gelled. It was a lot of fun to work with those folks. I think, take the risks, enjoy them. I would just encourage people to think really hard about valuing those offers.
Yeah.
Because, you can make, like, the sure thing money. I think if you go back 20 years, the sure thing money didn't really exist. You know, you could make 100, 150 maybe in a sure thing job, but you had very strict rules, you had bosses, you had 10 days vacation a year, you know. Or you could go to a startup and you could make 80 a year with the potential to make 10 million, 20 million. I think now, like, even the folks I've seen who've taken startup deals and they've worked out reasonably well probably make 50% more than they probably would have made doing a comparable thing at a big company for the same amount of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
There are exceptions, obviously, but
no, I get you. Okay. What do you think startups are indexing on with their hiring of engineers? You know, we've spoken about Amazon and interviewing stock. Is the startup scene different and why?
it is, yeah. The startup scene is very different because you have to find people who don't want to take astronomical amounts of money to go and work at the big companies. Um, if I go back to 2019, I am aware of returning interns, right? Come do an internship at a company. That company makes you an offer. You come back in a year or 18 months or whenever you graduate. Those people, those packages were $225,000 packages.
Okay.
No years professional experience.
Yeah.
Like maybe 2 internships, 6 months professional experience total, 225. So if you're a startup, you're trying to find smart, brilliant people who don't want to go and work at these big spots, right? You're looking for folks who are mission driven, not cash driven necessarily. So there's also, I mean, there was. I've been out of the market for like a year now. I think things have changed a lot in that year. You know, I'm sort of talking about pre-pandemic, pre sort of recession. So it may be very, very different on the ground today, but there's just a ton of startups here. So as a startup, you're competing with all the other startups at a similar stage as you. You're also competing with all of the FANG companies. So yeah, you are. I think there's a lot more compromise in startups around the cohesion and the soft skill type stuff. There's a lot more room for, and I hate the expression rock star engineer,
Yeah.
uh, but there's a lot more space for a couple of brilliant people who can go away and achieve the work of a team.
Yeah.
Right? You're not really thinking about stability. You're thinking about that next fundraise, that next launch.
I was going to say speed, get something to market before someone else does, because there's brilliant minds in San Francisco. And if you've got that idea, someone else probably has that idea, speed to get to market. So I could imagine there's a bit of a paradigm shift with who we're hiring here if you're a startup versus, deep pockets of Facebook, Amazon, whoever.
Yeah, you come back and you fix all the technical debt and you fix all the big problems. Um, yeah, you fix them once you've been acquired or gone public. You know, like you
Yeah.
fix them much further out, or if they are blocking you getting that product market fit or that new release or whatever, like yeah, you might give them a little bit of attention. Um, it's interesting. One of the things I'm seeing a lot of right now is like dev tooling startups
Yeah.
who are like, we'll eliminate all technical debt. It just requires a big investment to integrate our product. And all of the startups I know are like, we don't care.
Yeah.
Like nothing, anything we do that is not core mission
Really.
is a waste. Like we will just incur the technical debt. We will fix it when we can.
Okay.
You're
Interesting.
not. It's a little bit more like the UK contracting scene, I think, right? Like in a lot of cases, you're on a project. You are building a single thing. The thought to how you're going to run that later, how it's going to be maintained, how it's going to be stabilized, that's legitimately somebody else's problem. Like,
Okay.
if you find product market fit, you will probably find the resources to go back and fix those problems. If you
Yeah.
don't find product market fit, you don't exist.
Yeah.
You will run out of VC money. Like, you will not get past Series A. Like, it won't happen. So it's all about getting that market fit, proving you have a business, then worrying about how you go back and rationalize your source control or your coding standards or the fact that you're in 6 different repos and
That's quite a good analogy. The UK contract market is it literally like that? As in, tenures at companies look like 9 months to a year, or some of what I've heard, and people go to different companies' project, and that's it.
um I think that the differences around things like healthcare and sort of benefits as they're called here mean that folks are pretty wary of frequent job hopping.
Okay.
So you might join a startup and be at that startup until, like, if I look at a resume that has a bunch of short stints on it and they're companies I know didn't survive, that doesn't give me, it doesn't even, like, I don't like to ask that question anyway. I don't really care why you had a career break. That's none of my business. Like, as long as you can do the job and have, good answers to the behavioral questions. I know other hiring managers like, oh, where were you for this 6 months? Like, I hate that crap. But um, if you've been at companies that just haven't made it, like, okay, maybe you have bad luck. Maybe you don't pick employers particularly well, but like, that's fine. It doesn't look like you're a flight risk. It doesn't look like you're hopping around for, 20 pounds more a day or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think 10 years tend to be longer. Um, but yeah, I mean, when the idea fails and it runs out of money, yes, people go find new jobs for sure.
Do you coach startups on hiring strategies or
Hmm.
retention strategies at all?
Yep, absolutely. Quite a lot of that kind of stuff.
Do you?
Hmm.
Do you have some hiring principles that you follow?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key one, the thing that's most important is really understand the role you're hiring for. The amount of times I've seen people just, like, if you don't know the role you're hiring for, the chances of you making a good decision are very, very small. It's just luck at that point. So being able to articulate, like, the first thing I challenge hiring managers on is, what is the role? And I often hear things like, well, there's this one person on my team, and I kind of want another one of that. I'm like, great, no one can work on that job description. No recruiter, no sourcer can go out and find you someone just like Mary because we don't know Mary. You know what I mean? Like this doesn't help us in any way. Like, describe what makes this employee great. What makes this person really, really good at their job? And then let's laser focus that down until we have like 3 or 4 things. A couple of technical things, a couple of non-technical things, and then let's go looking for someone, let's interview with that in mind. We're going to get a ton of folks through the door, hopefully. We're going to speak to a bunch of people. Let's laser focus on those few competencies that really make that person successful. Later stage companies tend to have values, um, mission statements, tenets, values, principles, whatever you want to call them. Right? Amazon's leadership principles. Um, Twitch had values, right? Like, I don't remember what EA called them, but um, hopefully those values, if they're done well, represent your company. Bring those to the interview. If you care about how inclusive someone is, grill them on it. Find examples of how they've done these things. If you care about how quickly people provide feedback, and if they provide feedback in good ways, make that a focus, right? Give that, of those sort of 4 people doing behavioral stuff that I mentioned earlier, give them two areas each to cover. Like, that's 8 things. Right, what are the 8 key traits that you think are going to be most, make this person the most successful they can be?
Yeah,
So yes, that's sort of the principles.
that's some pretty good feedback. That's some pretty good feedback. Are you able to share anything about some of the startups that you're advising on before we wrap up? I think it's been a quality 40 minutes on your journey, some of the hiring landscape, nuts and probably shocking for some people as well, in good ways. But help us wrap up with anything that you're working on that's of particular interest.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm working with a company called Maka Live, Makalive.
Cool.
Um, they are doing live streamed uh fashion e-commerce
That's
in
cool.
Nigeria.
That's
Uh,
cool.
it's an amazing team. I really, really enjoy working with the folks. Um, the problems that we have, I'll send you a link over.
Yeah, I've got it.
You can include it in the show notes or whatever. The problems that these folks are grappling. I did actually get pinged about an outage they were having a little while ago. They asked me if I could jump in and help, and power cuts in the office, internet outages, like complicating troubleshooting. It's so cool to see something so innovative that's like really gaining traction and taking off. Um, it's really fun. Probably not super applicable to most of your audience, but I think it's just a really cool thing. There may be some jobs coming up there soon as well. So if folks are interested in maybe learning a bit more about it,
We'll drop a link for sure. We'll drop a link. I think what we should do is catch up in 6 to 12 months and see where the evolution of some of these startups are. Talk a little bit about them, what they're doing, what they're building, and a general catch up on the hiring landscape. And I can come a little bit more prepared and be a little bit more proactive
no,
in
absolutely, that would be really
in
fun. This has been
in
great.
that discussion. Simon, I want to say a big thanks for coming to share your experience with going to the US, challenges of visas. You know, it's a common question we get asked. It's a question that not necessarily people expect us to know the answers, but I think we do find engineers genuinely interested in UK, Europe, US. So it's good to have some more context. It's good to have some of the experience around some of the hiring discussions that you have with engineers in SF, and also what the startup scene's doing. Um, so a massive thanks.
No worries. Again, thank you for having me. One thing I'll sort of leave on. Um, Folks can just find me on LinkedIn. If they want to reach out and ask, like, "Hey, I'm thinking about moving. Is there anything I should, if folks just, I'm very happy to take those kinds of questions. I think one of the things that I'm really lucky is that right now I have time and space to kind of give back, and I would not be here if it wasn't for tremendous amounts of help from other people. So if I can, provide some comfort, some advice, a little bit of context, like I'm very happy to do that. So um, folks can find me on LinkedIn. Um, they can also reach out to on the website if they want sort of more formal coachy type stuff. But LinkedIn is just fine.
Yeah. And for everyone listening, a like, share, retweet. Everything is going to go a long way to getting this in the hands of some really good people who might genuinely be interested in going to the US. So everything is massively appreciated from people listening.
Cool.
Thanks a
Elliot,
lot.
thank you so much, man.
Pleasure. Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode. Massively appreciate you listening and checking in with us. If you want to find out more about us and what we're doing, please check us out on social media. What we're trying to do at Engineers is build a community to drive knowledge sharing and experiences. On Twitter, we can be found Engineers.io. It's no underscore. We've also got a website which is engineers.io. These links will all be posted in the description. Any feedback and comments are massively appreciated. We're always looking to improve on where we can. Thanks, guys.